of the third Trade for Peace Week. My name is Usha Dwaka Kanabazi. I'm the permanent representative of Mauritius to the WTO and current chair of the Committee on Trade and Development. It's a pleasure to be here with you at this session on regional perspectives on fragility and conflict and specific trade-related challenges, as well as possible ways to address them in the WTO. Whilst this afternoon we're going to be discussing specific country and regional challenges, the overall framework guiding this session, it is to better grasp the particulars associated with particular countries in situations of fragility and conflict. I think the idea is to try and ultimately understand what could help these countries move away from conflict and fragility and in the direction of development, stability, and peace. I must say that this also speaks to my work as chair of the Committee on Trade and Development. As chair, I am aware of the call made by the ministers of the G7 and the WTO accessions group at MC12 for the establishment of a dedicated WTO work program on trade for peace, or FCS, and the discussions being planned at the committee. We believe that the group would want to see a proposal made at the 13th WTO Ministerial Conference. The group is planning to submit a background paper on FCS to the committee, and we're hoping that the discussions that have taken place this week can contribute not only to the discussions, but also for the finalization of the paper. With that being said, I want to introduce today our speakers. Our first speaker is Ambassador Kadra Ahmed Hassan, who is the permanent representative of Djibouti to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva. She is also the coordinator of the Least Developed Country Group. Ambassador Kadra, I recall, is also the facilitator for the CTDSS. We then have Ambassador Saker Abdullah Al-Mokbel, my brother to the right, who is the permanent representative of Saudi Arabia to the WTO and the coordinator of the Arab group as well. And I'm very pleased this afternoon to welcome Ambassador Omar Hilal. He is the permanent representative of Morocco to the United Nations in New York and working party chairperson of the accession of Iraq. And for those who may be too young to remember, he was always a very prominent voice on WTO matters here. So we're very happy to have him with us. And of course, we have Mr. Melaku Desta, coordinator of the African Trade Policy Center, Regional Integration and Trade Division at the UN Economic Commission for Africa, connecting from Addis Ababa. I want to thank you all for joining this session today, and I look forward to our exchanges and insights that will come out of this afternoon's session. Before giving the floor to our panelists, let me explain the format of our session. First, I will pose a question to each of the panelists, and following their remarks, I will open the floor for questions and comments from the audience, both in the room and online. I will then briefly conclude the session. So this session is being recorded and will be made available to the public. So I say, let's start by listening to all the speakers, and I'll start with Ambassador Hassan. Ambassador Hassan is joining us online. And as coordinator of the LDC group, I want to pose this question to her. Ambassador, 22 out of the 37 states and territories which are recognized as FCS by the World Bank are equally classified as least developed countries. So they have one disadvantage and they have another disadvantage. While there may be some common ground between these countries, what are the specific challenges faced by LDCs when it comes to those countries which are in fragile and conflict-affected situations? As coordinator of the LDC group, I would be happy to listen to you on how fragility and conflict may affect the level of development of these countries, and of course, any suggestions you may have on what we could do to help contribute to easing this fragility. Ambassador, the floor is yours, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, dear moderator. I hope I'm audible. Yes?
Yes, we can hear.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. And I'm really sorry that I was not able to join you. I didn't want our meeting to be late while I'm crossing over to the WTO. I was in another meeting. But thank you, dear moderator and excellencies and all participants for the invitation to join this third edition of the Trade for Peace week. As in my capacity of LDC group coordinator to WTO, I'm mindful that the discussions that started several years ago in the WTO, it's a very important one. And from the context of WTO, we can on a daily basis see how, for instance, for LDCs, FCS LDCs who are acceding to the WTO, this is a decisive step for their economies. The question addressed to me for today's discussion on how fragility, mainly it's about how fragility and conflict may affect the level of development of these countries and what can be done to address it. I think this discussion today and this question provide an opportunity to highlight how trade can be harnessed to address conflict situation and contribute to stability. Indeed, here at the WTO, we can provide important inputs to deal effectively with this fragile and conflict-affected situation and context. But before delving into the work done here at the WTO, which is mainly the responses and the contribution of the WTO, I would like to first address how more specifically fragility may affect the level of development of LDCs countries. And I will, without being exhaustive, I will just give you a list of those elements. I will start with the dysfunctional governance, which is usually weak government role in implementing sound policies and putting in place effective mechanisms to sustain economic growth and poverty reduction. We can add to that often weak legislative and independent judicial checks and balances system which affect accountability of the public administration and governance. And that also lead to low level of public social services delivery. We also can point to the institutional and administrative weaknesses that lead to lack of capacity to manage core functions for the state, such as monetary, fiscal policy, resources mobilization, budget and debt management. The third point element is deficit and destruction of physical capital, mainly infrastructure, including energy and transport ones. The fourth one I can point to is the deficit in financial capital, also for the LDCs, vulnerable, affected by instability. But more generally, also I would say for any LDC, and this is low and lack of domestic savings due often to non-inclusive banking system and weak financial markets. And also debt services in the FCS LDC's budgets. Among other issues, I can point to the pandemic and climate change disaster induced compounded financial problems. So all these elements combined are conducive to generating socio-political fragility, instability due to a lack of confidence in the equity and fairness of the policies conducted by the government and contribute to the macroeconomic aspect that worsen development and increase the challenges during conflict. And I would like also maybe to add the lack of economic diversification, which is also an aggravating factor. To date, as you indicated, dear moderator, there are 22 LDCs in fragile situation that are recognized as FCS by the World Bank. And all of them are having different levels challenges to restore stability and economic recovery. These conflict-affected countries face a range of context-specific challenges that limit both capacities and resources and prevent the achievement of Agenda 2030. Conflict situation can lead to high unemployment rates and disrupted supply chains, which may affect the ability of such countries to grow and equally participate in global trade. The plight of these countries has been exacerbated by the current context of high energy and food prices, as they remain highly dependent on agricultural imports. As a result, at the beginning of 2022, an UNCTAD study highlighted that LDCs faced a shortfall of 16.4% of food imports for their calories intake. This would have devastating impacts on the growth of children, youth, nutrition rates, and hunger that were already worsened due to COVID-19 and also some other pandemic like Ebola in certain few LDCs. I think I can see two major breaks on the economy in recent years and within LDCs, and the pandemics are one of them, and also disasters, natural disaster, climate change, natural disaster induced, I would say. And now maybe I would like to return back to the question, to the last part of your question about how could the WTO work with the broader membership to ensure post-conflict and FCS LDCs benefit from the support of multilateral rules-based trading system. I would start by saying I share the views that that have been expressed, I think, in some of the discussions, that a multi-dimensional approach is needed in the quest of restoration of peace and stability and economic recovery. In many post-conflict scenarios, the economy figures high on the agenda of these countries, and it is critical to ensure post-conflict economy recovery as key and the center of restoring stability. Therefore, the accession of FCS LDCs into the former global economy is a major factor to consider in assessing the appropriateness of inserting trade and related topics into peace and or transition negotiations. Many analyses and documentation are available to point to that need to have a kind of the multidimensional approach, and I would like to maybe turn to one report, recent report from ECA, highlighting the contribution of trade to what it terms the triple nexus plus trade, which is a framework that brings together the humanitarian, development, peace and security sectors, and I would like to add here the trade as well. By assessing the plight and impact of conflict on internally displaced individuals in conflict zone, the report suggests that integrating trade within the triple nexus framework in terms of formulating policy can enhance sustainable development, peace and security, and decrease vulnerability of the population in a conflict zone. What does it mean? In practical terms, it means that financial and technical assistance could be channeled in a manner that supports an integrated agenda that combines the triple nexus and trade. In particular, the vulnerability and exposure of FCS LDCs need to be factored in the provision of such a special assistance. The report also recommends fostering regional integration of the countries exposed to conflict by, for instance, supporting their participation in parallel negotiations of regional trade agreements. And I think we have some experience here with the Aid for Trade in WTO and how it has already allowed G7 plus countries and other LDC group to increase economic transformation, including through the EIF program. I would like, apart from Aid for Trade, the WTO also holds regular meetings with acceding LDC members, and this is, I think, a very important part. And I think that's why the division that is inviting us today, it's also the accession division of the WTO. They are doing a great, they have a great role to play in that. Since many of the acceding members are those in post-conflict and conflict situation, and I'm pointing not only here also to particularly to the LDCs, I think with the completion of accession process, LDC's members stand to benefit from the support of WTO members and stronger participation in global trade from improved export opportunities and increased technical assistance to shape trade policies. Unfortunately, acceding LDC's members have faced stronger scrutiny in the past and continue to be outside of the multilateral trading system that WTO members benefit extensively from. And sometimes the fact that there is a kind of challenge for the acceding LDCs and particularly FCS LDCs, we can see that it can also impact the members, the LDC member or non-LDC member, particularly LDC member of the WTO. And I can give examples coming from a specific region where my own country, it's a member of the WTO, but our neighboring and trading partners are not part of or member of the WTO, but they're acceding members. In parallel, in order to tackle the rising humanitarian urgency, trade minister of WTO members took a landmark decision at the 12th Ministerial Conference held here in Geneva to support humanitarian food aid. This was the WFP food purchase exemption from export prohibition or restriction. This exemption for the WFP is critical to support humanitarian aid in conflict zone of the LDCs and combating hunger in such zones. It also demonstrates the steadfast commitment of WTO members to reduce the humanitarian impact of export restriction and decisively respond to the urgent challenges of our century. But I think, as I indicated, this needs to be combined to the other dimension and sectors of intervention so it can have an effective impact and positive effective impact. Before I conclude, I want to highlight that conflicts beyond LDCs and conflict within LDCs both create significant problems for the stability and strength of the global trading regime. However, here at the WTO, LDCs have supported and continue to believe in the contribution of trade solutions, while not a panacea. I think trade help in fulfilling the global effort to combat the ill effects of conflict. These have ranged from supporting food security, as I said, through the WFP purchases to strengthening the technical assistance and infrastructural investments. This intervention allow LDCs to continue their experience of economic transformation through global support and effective trade solution here at the WTO. No doubt that trade could play a greater role in using the SDGs achievement as a blueprint to prevent, stop, or at least reverse the negative effects of conflicts. We witness the fact that trade bolster the development and peace since it remains a great tool in a daily process of exchange in FCS, LDCs at the regional level and subnational level. Because even in the context of conflict, trade continue taking place and happening. And I would like also maybe to add and emphasize on the role of regional frameworks for promoting trade integration. And this framework could be instrumental in boosting the development of FCS LDCs. And I can refer to several frameworks for the African continental trade area, free trade area. At the sub-region levels, IGAD, COMESA is the African Community for African LDCs, but I can also refer to ASEAN for our Asian LDCs. And I would like maybe to add the last point, it's that to make sharper and targeted and tailored interventions to each situation of each individual FCS LDC country, I think will make the difference when we want to assure that trade would play a positive role in the economic recovery of LDCs. I would like once again to thank you, dear moderator, the Secretariat, in particular the Accession Division, for the invitation, and I stand ready to further engagement if need be. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you very much for that broad span of things. I noticed that you said that, and you reminded us, even in situations of conflict, trade continues to take place, but it does take place against a more difficult background. And you mentioned some of the issues, the lack of domestic savings, the debt service, the lack of economic diversification, then the cost of restoration of peace and stability itself, and of course, the impact of the internally displaced. All of these add up. And if you don't have domestic savings to invest, external investors also not keen necessarily to come into a situation of conflict. But we'll have a number of questions. We already have one here. We'll come back towards the end of the meeting. And I would request you perhaps to try and help me think and answer those questions about how Aid for Trade, because you mentioned that specifically, how Aid for Trade could be a useful instrument in helping the FCS. That would be good. I now turn to our next speaker with us this afternoon, and this is Ambassador Saker Abdullah Al-Mokbel. He will look at us from a regional lens. Ambassador, you're the coordinator for the Arab group, and we noted that out of the 37 FCS countries, there are 9 from the Arab region. Now, yours is even a more complex region because out of the 22 members of the Arab League, 13 of them are not members of the WTO. And Ambassador Hassan had mentioned that she's in a situation where Djibouti has to trade with countries which are not WTO members. And now I assume the same is for you as well, which makes life a bit more complex. So I was going to ask you, how do you see fragility and conflict first in the region? How does this impact upon trade? And what more can be done to help us get there, to move people from this conflict situation to development? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Osha. And I think nothing more to discuss about development of being our moderator as a chairperson of the CTD here. Also with this distinguished panelist, Her Excellency Ambassador Khadra, LDC coordinator, as well as His Excellency Ambassador Amar, the chairperson of the accession of Iraq. I believe that we are in the right time to talk about this situation. You are absolutely right. We are from the region where the most affected. You can see that how many numbers of the FCEs from the Arab countries. And to answer your question, I tried to back to statistics and make a trade analysis. And I will put these figures before you today and the audience to leave it for your imagination how its impact. So just in brief, if we can go to the slide is coming. I could say that we are responsible for the sustainable development here in WTO. This is our main objectives. And I don't want to repeat it, but rather to mention that this is from the preamble of Marrakesh Agreement establishing the WTO. And so Marrakesh is one of our regions. So we are, we see that WTO should retain at least to our region this favor. Also, when we back to MC12 outcomes, we were successfully committed as the ministers instructed us to underscore the importance of accessions. This is a very important means and tools that we should provide to the fragile and conflict affected states. So if we go again to the slide after, I will tell you our region still beyond the 2019 trade volume of trade before the corona impact, and 80% compared to the global in 2021, there was an increase
Mm.
volume of trade by 70%. So with this, I will give you also more focus on the FCS from the Arab region, the slide after, and I will let you to imagine how the difference between the impact of the crisis and the conflict on those who are member of WTOs compared to those who are still outside of the multilateral trading system. Djibouti is a member of WTO, and it's also considered as a FCS. However, we can see that the volume of trade compared to 2019 has increased 8%. Also, Yemen, as one of the most conflict-affected areas, you can see that their exports has increased, and they were able to increase it by 90% compared to 2019. Also, if we come back to one of the most qualified to access, we are just, and probably with her today is the accession division secretariat. So I believe that Comoros is almost ready to. This is the impact of the reform, the economic reform that we have seen. So they are, the number of imports doubled actually. This was a result of the bilateral conclusion of all bilateral market access in services and goods, and also the decrease in export. That means they are ready to access to this WTO. Lets them to benefit from the multilateral trading system. Comoros is ready. And if we back to other countries like Sudan, Iraq, Lebanon, and also if we could say the state of Palestine, you can see how the numbers tell us that it's time to give those FCS a chance to trade with us equally. Let's put them to be integrated into the multilateral trading system. We have to have a special classification for them, and we have to give them a special treatment during their accessions. We think that the technical capacity and technical assistance and capacity building is a must, not just after the accessions or during the accession, but even prior the accession, starting the accession. So with these conclusions and with these numbers, which I will share it with you after if you wish, I can say anymore that how it's important to our Arab countries to accede yesterday to the WTO rather than today or tomorrow. So thank you.
Ambassador, thank you very much. I think those are very interesting comments. And what I'm hearing from you is basically saying that there are all these fragile countries out there, conflict-ridden. They're in the process of accession to the WTO. Their accession needs to be expedited because that's the only way we can help them. So why are we taking so much time to exact concessions from them when in fact we should be trying to see how to help them? At the same time, it would be interesting to have more analysis of this data. I noticed, for example, that Comoros, such a small country, you know, and the level of trade is so low and mostly around the export of clubs and the export of vanilla. at which they're really very good. But in 2019, when the pandemic hit, they were already at 204. And they suddenly moved in 2021, hardly after the pandemic had left, at 443. But I want to say that probably they were also sheltered from the pandemic because of the poor communication with the country. You know, so that might have been something. And then suddenly they jumped from 443 to 254 to 68 and then 468 again. So to me, that is very interesting statistics. But the statistics that you point to the others, I think does show that it's uneven, the level of growth post-pandemic. Not everybody copes in the same way. But I think that proposal that maybe we need to find ways to expedite the accession process, especially that many of these countries are not exactly mind-blowing trade levels that will affect or distort trade across the world. This is something that maybe we need to take forward as well, but we'll come to the questions on that. I will turn now to our third speaker. Ambassador Hilal is the chairperson of the Working Party on the WTO accession of Iraq, which is a country affected by fragility and conflict, as everybody knows. Ambassador Hilal, I want to say this, has been a very powerful voice of the WTO, also having been the neighbor of Mauritius for a long time, so we heard a lot. But I think it's great to see him here in this new role. And I would like him to address, if possible, what is it that we can do in this WTO framework to help these countries? What can we do to help Iraq, for example? Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear good friend, Shah. I'm very happy to be back here in this room where I had so many meetings, and very happy to meet also and to work with Ambassador Sakhar, especially with framework of the Iraqi accession working group. And also happy to see faces that I know and with whom we are working. To answer your question, dear Rusha, I would like to make some comments. First of all, let me say how much I'm delighted to take part in this event in my capacity as chair of the Working Party of Iraq's accession to the World Trade Organization. The Trade for Peace Week remains an opportunity to forge new partnership and collaboration with the trade, peace, and humanitarian communities, and to make multilateral cooperation at the heart of the response to the challenges associated with fragility and conflict. I would like to seize this opportunity also to pay special tribute and salute the progress achieved on the nexus between trade and peace within the WTO under the leadership of the Director General, Madame Kanjo Emiela, who is strong advocate for supporting the world's least developed and conflict-affected countries and for enabling trade to nurture peace and peace building. I would like to associate also the director, Madame Saka Maika, for her effort and her staff, because they were behind all the progress that have been made. And I had the pleasure to work with her. We managed to bring her to New York. She'd never been there, but thanks to this issue and this thematic that is now making the bridge between New York and Geneva, and also between the two organizations. So the WTO has made of 2022 a year of consolidation of trade for peace. This has been manifested through more activities under the T4P program and more focus on country-specific and region-specific approaches in tackling the role of trade in generating peace and stability. It is also very encouraging to look at next year's activities, namely the first Trade for Peace conference and the publication of the first Trade for Peace book. Dear colleagues, Morocco is a strong advocate of the triple nexus, trade, peace, development, especially on the fragile conflict and post-conflict context. We believe that trade as an engine for development and integration in the multilateral trading system play a key role in strengthening the economies, building institutions, consolidating peace, ensuring security, and thus achieving sustainable development. As the chair of the Working Party on Iraq's accession to WTO, I have witnessed on a regular basis the challenges facing fragile and conflict-affected states. Bringing these perspectives into our discussion and to respond to your question, dear Rusha, I want to highlight and underline the following points. First, it is important to recognize that while each region or category of countries has its own challenges, fragile conflict states, FSC, tend to face common significant governance, economic, and social challenges. Furthermore, conflict and security, weak institutions, and limited access to justice, and also violation of human rights remain a great threat to sustainable development in those states. Two, engaging in the multilateral trading system through the accession of WTO plays a central role in enabling the FSC prosperity, human resilience, and sustaining peace, particularly for the Arab and Central Asia regions and the Horn of Africa, where economic integration could contribute to greater peace and stability. A lot of resources are spent in managing conflicts rather than preventing them and building peace in these regions. Three, it is worth noting that most of the acceding government to WTO are fragile and conflicts affected areas. Engaging in an accession process to WTO paves the way to, one, undertake the needed reforms and institutional policy. Two, create the needed structures for enhancing their international trade capacity. And three, prepare the needed documents for the accession process to WTO. This is an important exercise that will serve these countries both internally and in their international engagement within accession process mechanisms. In this vein, the accession process to the organization is itself an opportunity to benefit from institutional capacity building, boosting the economic diversification, and strengthening the involvement of the private sector and towards reforming its own economy and opening the market. In this vein, the accession process, I can say that gladly share that Iraq accession process is a concrete and successful example of how the steps undertaken, preparations, and requirement for this accession was not only beneficial for the acceleration of the process, but also for the internal, institutional, and jurisdictional reforms in Iraq. These reforms, which were supported by a strong political will from the Iraqi government, were a strong asset to prepare the main important document required to relaunch the process and contributed significantly to strengthening the national institutions in Iraq, which leads the way toward the diversification of its economy and regional and international integration, and thus consolidate peace and recover from the post-conflict situation. I very much look forward to continuing this amazing journey with the new Iraqi government in full cooperation with the Accession Division of WTO under the outstanding leadership of Ms. Maika Oshikawa. Ladies and gentlemen, as working party chair, I'm convinced that WTO has a strong potential in addressing the fragility facing the FCS at many levels. Generally, there is a growing awareness about the specific needs of the FCS, but there is still more to be achieved. In terms of support, capacity building, assistance, and space given to these states to assist and accelerate their accession to the WTO. I welcome in this regard the call made by the G7, as well as the WTO accession group for the establishment of dedicated work program on trade for peace for fragile and conflict-affected states. This program will have the potential to make this discussion to a stronger level. As I have mentioned, most of the acceding countries to WTO currently are in situation of fragility or post-conflict, which require a specific treatment. And I think it has been said by Ambassador Hassan and also by my dear brother, Ambassador Sakhar. They need, or that requires specific treatment in the steps and negotiations of the accession process. There is a need to draw a delicate balance between the flexibility to be given to the states and the need to ensure the respect to WTO requirements and standards of the process. Therefore, the support of FCS in this context needs to be tailored, considering their specific needs and national circumstances. A country that have just get out from civil war cannot be treated as a country that there is no civil war. Country that have been fighting international terrorism, Al-Qaeda or Daesh, should not be treated as a normal country in Sahel or in the Horn of Africa or in Central Asia. Country that was fighting Daesh on the name of the international community should deserve more understanding, more respect, and more flexibility. That's why I reiterate in this regard the call on all our WTO member states, the members of the working parties, our partners in the World Bank, and all relevant stakeholders to further scale up the assistance by engaging in sharing experiences, providing technical assistance, training to negotiate it, and scaling up trade expert profiles, as well as by demonstrating the flexibility needed for encouraging these countries to advance their accession without prejudice to the quality of the process. And here I just want to say that we are not asking privileges to these countries who are in fragilities or post-conflict situation. We are not asking to not respect the rules or waiver to the practices. We are just asking members to think that it's not business as usual. It's specific process that need to be done and specific political understanding to be given to these countries. Ladies and gentlemen, and before I conclude, I would like to share the following recommendations. First, in perspective of future discussions and engagement, trade for peace discussions could encompass a larger range of matter of priorities for the fragile conflict states, such as food, security, migration, refugees, digital literacy, private sector participation, and foreign direct investment, the empowering of women, that is very important element. Two, in the case of crisis affected cross-border regions such as Lake Chad and crisis epicenters like Central Mali, assistance and support merit particular attention beyond security and military response. Trade integration, investing in income-generating projects would contribute significantly to reducing violence between tribes, improving services delivery, expanding economic opportunities, and building practice of inclusion and dialogue for population in this area can help stabilize communities. Three, technical and financial support for specific climate change initiatives is of utmost importance, especially in the Sahel, where tensions between farmers and herders are exacerbated by the adverse impact of climate change, and at times the cause of forced population displacement and conflict generation, and also migration that all of doesn't want to see. But Europe should also try to help to keep these people there and to be more flexible for the economic integration of their economy, and especially when we are in process of acceding to WTO to understand that they can help them a lot. 4, comprehensive, complementary and coherent approaches among partners working across the humanitarian development peace nexus are required to tackle the multi-risk, multi-dimensional challenges in conflict affecting settings. Therefore, deepening the conversation on trade and peace is needed at many levels at WTO, as well as with the international financial organizations, United Nations entities, funds, and programs. Finally, I would like to seize this opportunity of this meeting to reiterate the timeless to force a partnership framework between United Nations Peacebuilding Support Office, PBSO, and WTO, in particular its accession division. The PBSO and the PBC already works closely with international financial partners, such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, including to ensure that their engagement with fragile and conflict-affected states is aligned with peace-building priorities and help addressing the drivers of conflict and fragilities. In my role as chair of the Central African Republic configuration of the PBC, I am actively engaged in mobilizing partners and identifying opportunities for investing in socio-economic development, and I would like to assure you of my full engagement and support in developing a framework for PBSO WTO partnership. This partnership will be indeed one of innovative ways to foster support and a coordinated approach in responding to the challenges facing the FCS, including those that are trade-related. It is time to rethink peace and investing in trade-related projects, climate resilience, prevention, and resilience incentive, among other stability drivers. The WTO, in cooperation with the relevant stakeholders, has all the potential to play this role. I thank you very much.
Ambassador, thank you very much for that very comprehensive outlook. I was thinking in my head that, your statement could actually serve as a work program for the FCS companies to take forward. So thank you for that. But I noted a number of things. I think the statement you made that we're spending money trying to solve conflicts and spending money repairing things after conflicts rather than preventing them. You mentioned also the question of regional integration, which was also taken up by Ambassador Al-Mokbel, which is that this helps with stability. So what do you do when in the region you have countries which are WTO, non-WTO, and you're trying to get that regional integration going? You need to address those issues. And you've said so many other things that once you've exceeded and you engage in the WTO, you're very much compelled to strengthen your institutions, respond to the queries of members, change your manner of trade. So in a way, it's compelling you out of a conflict situation towards actually doing things and towards actually trying to veer away, however difficult, towards a normalization, if I can call it that way, of a situation. But then also something that all three of you have picked up is the question of individual countries. These are individual circumstances. These are national circumstances. You're not going to have a one-size-fits-all approach for all these countries. You have to tailor-make individually, maybe not WTO alone, but with a lot of countries. So let's hear from our last speaker, who is the person who's been following this from the perspective of the, I think, African Economic Commission, Mr. Melaku Desta. Melaku, how is fragility and conflict reflected in the case of African countries? And could you maybe share with us a little bit? We've heard a lot about institutional and trade-related challenges for Africa, especially the FCS countries. I think Ambassador Kadra said earlier, trade continues in an FCS country. But I think, was it Hannah Blight yesterday from the IFC who mentioned the case of a country? By the time they move the product from the place where it is to the border, it's twice the cost. These countries are already affected by competitiveness. Now they have to add to this added cost as well. What can we do to help these countries, and what has your institution been doing to help these countries? Floor is yours. Melaku, floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador. I hope you can hear me. Greetings to all of you from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and I would like to thank you, Ambassador, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank the WTO Secretariat for inviting me to be part of this panel, and I feel honored that I am part of this stellar panel of African leaders based in Geneva. So in trying to answer your question, Ambassador, let me start by reiterating a few points that have already been made, and coming last on the program, and having listened to all the three excellent interventions that have been made, I feel comforted by the fact that many of the issues that I thought I would highlight have already been touched upon in different ways. So in trying to answer your question, let me say, first, I think we are interested in trade, not just for trade's sake, but mainly for its direct and indirect contributions to raising people's standards of living and the generation of wealth. At the UNECA, where I work, and you specifically asked me to talk about the work that we do here, Ambassador, my colleagues have done a lot of empirical and modeling work to answer this exact question in relation to the FCFTA agreement. What does it mean for Africa, for example? What will be its implications for intra-African trade, for African GDP, for African welfare, etc.? The results of the exercise are quite impressive. According to our projections, the AfCFTA, once implemented, is expected to increase intra-Africa trade by around 40% in 2045, compared to that same year in the absence of the AfCFTA. What would have happened without the AfCFTA? As a consequence, it's also expected to increase African GDP, output, and human welfare by a substantial degree. So when we talk about trade, we are talking about its contribution to welfare, to incomes, to prosperity. And secondly, by contributing to wealth creation and on the continent and to raising standards of living, the AfCFTA is believed to contribute, albeit indirectly, to the creation of a conducive environment for democracy and peaceful coexistence within and between nations. And the drafters of the AfCFTA agreement, which was adopted in 2018, had this very goal in mind when they prepared the agreement. If I just read Article 3.1 of the AfCFTA agreement, it reads as follows. I quote: the general objectives of the AfCFTA are to A, create a single market for goods, services, facilitated by movement of persons in order to deepen the economic integration of the African continent, and in accordance with the Pan-African vision of an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa enshrined in Agenda 2063. It is this effort, ambition to realize that vision of an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa that sits behind the AfCFTA project itself, Excellencies. Indeed, on the continent, the belief in the power of trade as an enabler of prosperity and therefore of peace has a longer pedigree than the 2018 agreement. Since the establishment of the Organization of African Unity in 1963, regional economic integration has been pursued as a strategy to replace the many small and fragmented national markets on the continent with a large single market that would create the economy of scale that supports increased African production, value creation, employment, and prosperity. As I noted earlier, behind this approach lies the belief that poverty creates a conducive environment for conflict, while prosperity creates the conditions for peace in internal and external relations. Most of the regional economic communities on the continent have their own courts, or tribunals, as does the AfCFTA agreement itself, which contains a protocol on dispute settlement modeled after the WTO's dispute settlement understanding as well. This is to emphasize the point that the establishment of institutions to manage and resolve conflict situations peacefully is another innovation that has accompanied the regional integration efforts on the continent. Inspired by all this and in appreciation of the increasingly pressing need for peace, stability, and prosperity in Africa, here at the UNECA, we're completing a major study that explores the relationship between trade and what we call the triple nexus of peace, security, and development on the one hand, and trade on the other. And I was very happy to hear Her Excellency Ambassador Kadra making reference to this report. The report asks us to how trade may contribute to the transition of African countries from fragile, unstable, and emergency contexts toward sustainable development. The draft of the study was featured at the recent African Union Policy Conference on the Nexus of Peace, Security, and Development, which was held in Tangier, Morocco, just a few weeks ago. ECA's analysis demonstrated that trade is relevant in countering fragility and promoting effective transitions from a state of conflict to one of peace. While preparing for this brief intervention today, I also looked at some of the documentation that is available on the WTO website on the trade and peace nexus and several sources. I learned, among others, that 6 of the 9 countries that sought to use the multilateral trading system as the pathway to achieving stability and peace and formed the G7 plus WTO accessions group are African: Comoros, Sao Tome and Principe, Somalia, South Sudan, and Sudan, all of which are in the process of WTO accession as we speak. And Liberia is the 6th one, which joined the WTO in 2016. Let me also add that, as I indicated at the beginning, I am speaking to you from Addis, which sits at the heart of the Horn of Africa region. And this region has been referred to already by my fellow panelists earlier. Beautiful and historic and highly strategic as it is, the Horn is also burdened with recurrent conflicts and characterized by a high concentration of fragile and conflict-affected states. The Horn, defined broadly, comprises 8 countries: Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, Djibouti, Kenya, and Uganda. While it will be wrong to try to draw a causal link between WTO membership and fragility this easily, I think it is still remarkable that the first 5 countries, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia, Sudan, and South Sudan, are on the World Bank's list of fragile and or conflict-affected countries. Incidentally, none of these 5 countries is a member of the WTO, but all except Eritrea are at different stages of negotiating their accessions to the WTO. Finally, none of the other 3 in the Horn, Djibouti, Kenya, and Uganda, is on the list of fragile and or conflict-affected countries. Again, incidentally, all of them are WTO members. Of course, we need to resist the temptation to create a causal link here. Conflict has many causes, and being part of the multilateral trading system is no guarantee for peace and stability. But these facts remain remarkable all the same, I believe. In conclusion, Madam Chair, first, ECA studies demonstrate that trade agreements, by promoting integrated economies and by creating disincentives among states and their actors, can reduce conflict. The fullest and the speediest implementation of the FCFTA is therefore likely to pay dividends, not just in terms of development, but also in terms of peace. Second, and crucially, we should stop responding to issues of trade, conflict, and fragility in separate silos. Our studies and the outcomes of the recent African Union Policy Conference on the nexus of peace, security, and development show that a triple nexus approach is necessary, and I was very happy to hear this point emphasized by His Excellency Ambassador Omar just a moment ago. Third, anecdotal observations across the African continent also show that unfair trade can undermine peace in a region. in order for it to serve the goals of sustainable peace and stability, the fact that trade is happening between any two or more countries is not enough. The trade relationship needs to be governed by a system of rules that meet the attributes of fairness in terms of their content and impartiality and transparency in terms of their practical administration. Finally, capacity is critical. In the context of AFCFTA implementation, for example, one issue that is coming up increasingly is this. Considering how porous most of the borders already are, how do we ensure that formal trade liberalization, trade facilitation, and border opening measures under the AFCFTA do not exacerbate already high levels of organized cross-border crime and erode the confidence of AFCFTA state parties in the AFCFTA project itself? This, I think, is a difficult question. If it's left unaddressed, such concerns risk not only reintroduction of trade barriers at the borders, but potentially may also end up igniting conflict between adjoining countries. Institutional capacity, more than political will, is often the issue in these kind of situations. And the good thing is that with political will and determination, the international community can help to address the causes of fragility and conflict. And I think a lot of very good ideas have already been put on the table by my fellow panelists earlier. Expediting the accession of many of the countries still negotiating with the WTO and enabling meaningful integration and participation once inside the multilateral trading system would be a good place to start. Within Africa, investing in the fullest and most effective possible implementation of the AFCFTA should be the priority, both within the continent as well as with all the partners of the continent. We often describe the AFCFTA as Africa's Marshall Plan for a reason, because we believe that the AFCFTA is our tool to realize that Pan-African vision I mentioned, I quoted for you earlier, an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa, as articulated in Agenda 2063. I thank you, Madam Ambassador. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Malako. It was interesting to hear that from an African perspective. I note again, all of you have now mentioned the question of importance of having integrated economies, because we feel that if economies are integrated, the capacity for them to go into conflict is much lessened on that one. But I want to pick out two things which are very different. One is a question of capacity. Two is the question that we cannot solve everything, but whether in doing what we're doing, we run the risk of exacerbating cross-border crime. That's a question that I think goes beyond WTO, but it's important to say. Three is the Pan-African vision, which is today encapsulated in the African Continental Free Trade Area. How that goes forward, how it is implemented will be a very big challenge for all of us. The African countries who are members of the WTO and who are not yet members of the WTO. So that will be already something. But I want to pick out something that you shared, which was education. And this is SDG 4. In conflict-ridden situations, this is not trade related, but it is in a way, you have children who suffer from this, not necessarily having access to formal education for some time. Now, I just share this story with you. Recently, I visited this exhibition run jointly by Poland and Ukraine on the question of, Mom, I don't want war. And this was photographs of the children depicting the war. And it shocked me to realize that many children on all sides of the conflict had internalized the concept of war as though it was something natural in their lives. And I think that is totally unacceptable, personally. And again, here, education can play such a crucial role for helping prevent the conflict that Ambassador Omar mentioned. We're deflecting wars, we're deflecting conflicts, we should invest in preventing conflicts. But not all countries, especially conflict-ridden countries, have capacity to pay for that education. Many of our countries are lucky. Mine is one where education is free till tertiary level, including university, but it's not given to everybody. Mine's a very small country. But again, I think this is something that we need to think of broader. where countries cannot or do not have the domestic savings to invest in broad education? What can be done in these situations to help build a better country? But let me turn towards a number of questions which have come through to us. And I will start with the Ambassador of Saudi Arabia. Ambassador, we have one question here about G20. And basically it says, we all know that your country has done a lot to help countries in the region, but you are in a unique position as a member of G20 because you are able to leverage international opinion and international assistance, in fact, in favor of countries both in your region and elsewhere. I was wondering whether you could share with us some of the things you may have done, but also what do you think that countries in the region themselves can do together to bring to your attention and ask for support to go to G20? Floor is yours, Ambassador.
Thank you, Osha, and thanks also for this question. I believe that one hand cannot pass alone. So from a country that we feel responsible regionally about helping other countries, we don't always prepare to talk about what we do, but as long this embarrassing question been said, let me to tell you that according to the King Salman Humanitarian and Relief Center, the donation now reach almost $6 billion US. The beneficiary countries almost 86 countries. And what's take my attention here is that for food security, almost $2 billion US just goes for food security. It doesn't mean that we will not continue to do this responsible role, but we need the collective responsibility from the international community. Sometimes regional conflicts cannot be resolved only internally and regionally. We need the collective responsibility from others, allowing them from where they can. Of course, if I go to the UN, I will switch this session to be peace for trade. But when I come to WTO, I will say trade for peace. Please, let's them to be integrated into the multilateral trading system to allow them to do more. Of course, we will continue to work closely with our partners in the G20, but also let's recognize that this very important intergovernmental organizations, the WTO, can play a crucial role if we allow them to integrate into the multilateral trading system. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that answer. And I'll pick up on your issue of food security because we have a question here from Noor Kabara. And it says, one of the most important aspects of trade is food security. And many times, countries in which conflict are prominent are countries facing challenges and issues in securing food. And food insecurity further exacerbates conflicts and prevents building and maintaining peace. So how can FCS countries better take part in trade to fight instability and build sustainable peace? But also, how do you fight food insecurity for these countries? Is this one area where we can think of specific rules under trade, for example, to have them address food security? And I say this, Ambassador Omar, to you and also to Ambassador Kadra, because we know that for us, for example, when we created the net food import in developing countries, it was the first acknowledgement of that problem. We're net food importers. So is there space there for some specific rule or for some flexibility for them, do you think?
I think, as we used to say, where there is a will, there is a way. I would say where there is political will should be also flexibility. Because this countries who are now in accessions. Most of them are in crisis, political crisis, internal conflicts, post-conflict situation, fragility, attacks by extremists. So these countries deserve to be seen differently, especially for their process to accede to WTO. For them, they see WTO as the a destination where they can reach prosperity, trade, they can benefit for their market, for the reform of their economy, and also for their regional integration. So what is needed from WTO is another spirit or another view to the situation of these countries. The rules of that's my own opinion. The rules of WTO are not written on marble. And they know that when WTO wants to do it, they made flexibility. But what sometimes, as we are working, based on the consensus, we cannot go beyond, and we have to respect. But I think it's the benefit of everybody, because the peace in these countries is in fine in benefit of developed countries. So it's not just their ambition or their desire or their wish to be part of the organization, but for them, it's a salute perspective. It's peaceful perspective also, and especially to see for them, it's hopes for the new generation and building better future, and also not being alone to face different challenges, security challenges, climate change challenges, migration challenges, the lack of good governance challenges, coup d'etat that are now coming back to Africa. All these challenges have to be seen from perspective of Geneva, as of course they are challenges, but they are also a call for responsibility, call for collective action, a call for also taking this opportunity to help, because we cannot see any crisis only from the perspective of security. There is always education, there is culture, there is dialogue, there is social things, and there is reconciliation. So it's a multidimensional aspect or spectrum that is needed to be seen in all this aspect. And of course, the WTO is not only organization for making trade and making money and business. It should be also organization with humanitarian perspective, because this is, I think, the most noble action that this organization is doing. And I'm happy that now there is this link between New York and Geneva. And I think we will bring more different perspective to the conflict, because we cannot settle conflict only by sending UN mission and soldiers. We need also to invest in the other aspects that are needed for these countries.
Thank you, Ambassador. Turn towards Ambassador Kadra. Would you like to add some thoughts to that, Ambassador?
Thank you, dear Usha and dear moderator. I would like to address there is a question I think here about how the WTO can assist the reconstruction. And I think Ambassador Hilal really tried to address that from the peace building perspective, which I really completely share the recommendation made there. And the question is, can WTO contribute to reconstruction? And when we say WTO, I'm thinking as a system, and also what it provides the opportunity to trade in a more, I would say, structured and predictable way. And I'm tempted to answer yes, if we replace appropriately trade in the broader context of development, sustainable development, and see it as an important element in the many other tools that we have that we could use, I think we can safely say yes. And I'm saying that because earlier I think I indicated the fact that in even situation of conflict in LDC's countries, and I would say even in any country, trade is the aspect of life that never stops. Starting at the subnational level, people find ways to go to continue going to the market and go and buy, and those who are not buying are selling. So trade continue even at the subnational level. But I would say also at the regional level, obviously, because as I said, and I think it has been emphasized here, including from the brother from Addis in the ECA, that we are from a region where trade never stopped, despite the brand our region has of always being in conflict. And I think maybe here, if we were to benefit and see trade as a positive force, as I said, among the toolbox that we could use, it's if we have trade associated in a more structured way along humanitarian development, peace and security, to address the macroeconomic and political weaknesses of LDCs in terms, and particularly those who are in conflict, so that the trade cannot benefit only a small group, but it can be have a kind of positive boomerang effect in the whole society, if I may say so. And it will also inject to the system and to the countries and to the communities the social justice, fairness, equal opportunities that are I would say, should be the basis for consolidating that. So in other terms, we need to find a better way how the system could contribute in the internal recovery of countries, because most of the LDC's countries that are fragile states, or even in an open and post-conflict or post-conflict, most of them, those conflicts are internal conflicts. Is not between two countries. This is also the peculiarity that we need to keep in mind. So maybe to address in practical terms the WTO, what WTO is doing and can do. And I think, dear moderator, you asked me about the specifics of Aid for Trade. I think we can refer to one specific instrument that has been established by the Aid for Trade, which is the EIF. Which is exclusively for LDCs. And in that context, EIF contributed in alleviating really the challenges and the difficult situation of in different aspects, different level. As I said, is not one size fit all approach. It has to be tailor-made and more sharper way of doing. And I think we have an opportunity, since we are thinking about the third phase of EIF, and we are discussing it now. It's very, I would say, up to us to do better in those discussions. But I have an example when we had LDCs benefiting from the funding of EIF, and because of a conflict, because of instability, those funding has been suspended. And we had in the board to discuss how to do, to make sure that the project that has started are finalized, and how we could, without going against the rule of the the provision of the funding still continue. And I think that this kind of flexibility is needed. I think it's the call that Ambassador Hilal was making about a better understanding and greater understanding of the diversity of situation of FCS LDC's country, I think is much needed. And we can have another kind of process that we are in as LDC is the graduation proposal that we have here in the WTO again, to make sure that LDC who are graduating are not going to relapse because of instability and fragility that is already, as I said, structural, but also it can be exacerbated in a case of instability and conflict. Stability and conflict, sometimes not an open conflict, it can just be sometimes elections that are very tense and difficult elections. And I think it impacts also the accession processes. I have seen cases where the country was very much involved and engaged and committed to the accession process, but because of election, change of government, everything is put back to almost square one. So I think these are the specificity that we need to look at, and definitely as members of the WTO and the WTO as an institution can have play a positive role and a greater role. Thank you.
Basa, thank you for picking out the specific examples to, I think, explain to everybody that certain things are possible. You need the political will, obviously, but things are possible. I know somebody's looking at me because we're running out of time, but I did, but I did have one more question here, which has remained, and I want to turn towards our colleague from Economic Commission for Africa, Melako Desta, on this one. It says, what are potential instruments that we can have to apply to address supply side constraints in FCS? And I again, Melako, while you're talking about this, maybe tell us how you see, whether you see, it's difficult for WTO to imagine that it can work alone to do this. And I think several speakers have mentioned this. So how do we create that framework that will allow people to come together to do something for the FCS as well? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I think this is an important question. How do we address the supply side constraints? And I think in the context of Africa, we have been looking to, again, I'm going back to the AfCFTA. We have been looking to the AfCFTA as our tool with which to create a large enough market that can attract investment directly, because that makes the commercial case. The moment you produce something within the continent, you are able to reach immediately. When the agreement's implemented, you will have access immediately to a consumer base of over 1.3 billion people. That we think is one of the major roles that the AfCFTA can play. And Ambassador, if you don't mind me also saying a word or two on the important question raised earlier about food security. Does the WTO have room for additional rulemaking in this area? I thought I should say that I think the answer to that is yes. And the reason I say that is because just look at where the WTO has been, the rulemaking machinery of the WTO has been stuck for the past 20+ years in the WTO, in the agricultural negotiations. Many of our countries, many of these conflict affected countries, many of the LDCs, they have huge agricultural potential. They cannot even invest in their agricultural sectors because they can't, for example, use export opportunities as an incentive for them to invest in their agriculture. In many cases, they can't even protect their own markets from dumped food products on their domestic markets. So I think there is room for that, but of course, in order to achieve it, the WTO will have to the WTO members, I have to say, because the WTO is as strong as the members can make it. The WTO members have to live up to their own rhetorics about making trade a development instrument. I think that's really an important thing that's worth reiterating all the time. And in terms of bringing together, I'm in agreement with you that we have to use different platforms. The WTO can play its own role. but there are also several other platforms that I think we have to explore. The UN structures have been mentioned already. The ambassador, His Excellency's Ambassador of Saudi Arabia, has mentioned the role of Saudi Arabia, for example, in the G20, and of course within the WTO itself, there is the LDC group, there is the Africa group, there are all sorts of other platforms. But I think, and then in conclusion, I am hoping, for example, the Africa Union has been had applied for a long time to have an observer status in the WTO. As far as I know, that has not been granted yet. So there should be a number of opportunities, a number of avenues for us to explore, ways of bringing trade or the WTO system more closely into the development-related conversations, and thereby help address the challenges of fragile and conflict afflicted countries. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Meleko, thank you very much. I believe this brings us to the end of this session on regional perspectives on fragility and conflict. What we heard generally this afternoon was that there is a basis for a work program for FCS, and there are specific things that can be done, even now, under trade and accession to help the FCS countries at the level of the WTO alone. Then there are other things that will require that a number of institutions come together to work out tailor-made programs to help the FCS countries. Perhaps what is the most important in this, and this is brought up by several speakers, where there is a will, there is a way. So what we need to do is to mobilize that political will to make this happen and to help the countries that need help. Now, while this concludes session 3 of the Trade for Peace Week, there are 2 more panels in the coming days that will continue to explore the topic of fragility and conflict and how trade and economic integration can foster peace. To keep yourselves updated on the events of the week, please follow @trade_for_peace on Twitter and LinkedIn. I am left now to thank the interpreters who stayed with us a little while, longer than expected, to thank the speakers for giving us your time and giving us your thoughts. Thank you very much, and for taking the questions from the participants. Thank you, participants, for raising questions as well. That was important. And of course, Maika Oshikawa, I want to thank her, Amanda, and the whole team for organizing this, and for all of you who are here today. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon. Bye.